Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Francis was one of the most prolific players of the 2000s, known for his ball handling ability and his flashy dunks. But he has a very interesting story, and it's one of the most interesting stories I've seen from an NBA player, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how he went from selling drugs as a kid to being a 3-time NBA All-Star to where he's at now. So let's talk about it. Now, Steve Francis had a very rough upbringing. His dad was sentenced to 20 years in prison for bank robbery, and his mom was diagnosed with cancer. And at the same time, when he was 10 years old, he started selling drugs on the street. Now, Steve Francis would only play in 2 total basketball games in high school for 6 different schools, but when he was 18 years old, his mother died from cancer. And when he was 18 years old, he graduated from high school and would attend San Jacinto University, where he played his freshman year of basketball, and that is a junior college. He had a very impressive freshman season, and that led to him transferring to Allegheny University of Maryland, where he had a great sophomore season and would actually drop a quadruple double in one game, and that caught the eye of the University of Maryland. Steve would go off in his junior season and his first season at the University of Maryland. He would average 17 points per game on 52% shooting, and he would lead the University of Maryland to the 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, where they lose in the Sweet 16. But he would go on to be drafted the next year by the Vancouver Grizzlies, 2nd overall. Now, Steve Francis would never play a game for the Vancouver Grizzlies because he just didn't want to play there, so he was traded to the Houston Rockets, and they were coming off a time where they had a failed super team. If you remember that, it was Hakeem Olajuwon, Scottie Pippen, and Charles Barkley. They were coming off that period, and they were looking for a fresh start, and that fresh start was Maryland's Steve Francis.
Jetzt erhöhen sie die Intensität in der Verteidigung. Houston, Francis, ja, ich bin da skeptisch, ob man diese unglaublich hohe Trefferquote halten kann. Bullard, Francis, 3, bumm. Wie gesagt, relativ vornehme Zurückhaltung des Point Guards der Houston Rockets in diesem.
Francis would set the league on fire in his rookie season, and he would average 18 points per game, 6 assists, and 5 rebounds on 44% shooting, and that got him co-rookie of the year next to Elton Brand. The Rockets weren't very good, but Steve Francis showed that he can be their franchise superstar. In Francis' second season, he would average about 19 points per game, 6 assists, and 6 rebounds, and that was pretty good for his second season. He would also shoot 45% from the field and 36% from 3, which was pretty good. And he would lead the Houston Rockets to 45 wins, which is pretty good for your second season in the league. The next season, Francis would finally become a first-time All-Star, averaging about 21.5 points per game with 7 rebounds and 6 assists. But the Rockets were terrible. They were actually the worst team in the league. So with the first pick in the 2002 NBA draft, the Houston Rockets selected Steve Francis' co-star, Yao Ming. In Francis' 4th season in the league, he would average about 21 points per game and would become a second-time All-Star, and the Houston Rockets greatly improved, winning 43 games with their new star duo of Yao Ming and Steve Francis, and the future looked bright in Houston. In Steve Francis' 5th season in the league, he would average about 16.5 points per game, which was a bit of a down year for him, but he would still be a 3rd-time All-Star. And the Houston Rockets would win 45 games, but the Houston Rockets figured that they needed a change that offseason, so they made that change. Tracy McGrady was growing unhappy in Orlando, so he requested a trade, and a trade was made that sent Steve Francis to the Orlando Magic, and it would also send Tracy McGrady to the Houston Rockets. Now, Steve Francis had a really good first season with the Orlando Magic, averaging about 21.5 points per game with 7 assists. And the Orlando Magic weren't very good. They only won about 36 games, but the team was really stacked. They had Steve Francis, a rookie Dwight Howard, Grant Hill, Tony Battie, Katino Mobley, Hedo Turkoglu, and Jameer Nelson. And even though they weren't very good with the record, they were a stacked team. Things were going great for Steve Francis until one night against the Seattle Supersonics when he refused to re-enter the game and would be suspended by the team, and at the trade deadline they would trade him to the New York Knicks in exchange for a washed-up Penny Hardaway and Trevor Ariza. And you could tell by that trade package that they just wanted to get rid of Steve Francis. Him and head coach Brian Hill obviously didn't get along, and the next season with the New York Knicks, his new team, he would average about 10 points per game, and he would be injured a lot that season, and he was unfortunately becoming a role player. Now, going into the 2007-2008 season, Steve Francis would go back to the Houston Rockets, and he would average about 5.5 points per game coming off the bench until he had a knee injury 10 games into the season that would sideline him for the rest of the season. And it was weird going back there to Houston for him because he was teammates with Tracy McGrady, who he was traded for. And looking back on that, apparently, according to Francis, he had a problem with McGrady. In the 2008-2009 season, Steve Francis would rehab his injured knee, but no NBA teams were interested. Now he was officially out of the league, and the only teams that were interested were from China. I don't know the teams in China, so we're just going to assume that he went to the Guangdong Tigers.
Guangdong Tigers. Ni hao! Ni hao!
Francis was now 31 years old and was out of the league, and if things couldn't get worse for him, his stepdad killed himself, and that led to alcohol abuse for Francis, and he would be in and out of jail. In November of 2016, he was arrested for driving under the influence, and in December of 2016, he was caught trying to break into a woman's car. So things were not looking good for Steve Francis, but he did decide to turn his life around 2018, and he started the Steve Francis Foundation, and he has been sober ever since. Yeah, that's the very sad story of Steve Francis, but also a very interesting story. Let me know what you guys think about Steve Francis, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.